Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take some pretty dense sources, find the core ideas, and basically give you that essential knowledge without, all the overwhelm.
Right. We know you're looking to really get things, to have those aha moments.
Exactly. So today we're jumping into a work called Two Psychological Types. Specifically, we're looking at how the author interprets Friedrich Schiller's ideas and, well, why they still resonate psychologically.
Our mission really is to unpack Schiller through this author's lens. We'll focus on that core tension he identified,
Which
how our individual skills and roles get specialized, and how that sometimes creates conflict, inside us and in society, and also that deep human search for, well, harmony and wholeness.
Okay, I think I get that. Have you ever felt like pulled in totally different directions, like parts of you are at war?
I think most people have, yeah.
This deep dive is right into that feeling. So let's start with Schiller himself. Why does the author think he's still so important?
Well, the author sees Schiller as just profoundly insightful, really penetrating psychologically with this broad view on resolving inner conflict.
So not just some dusty old philosopher.
Not at all. The author really values him, wants to bring those historical ideas into a modern psychological context. The argument is they're still incredibly relevant.
That's pretty cool, actually. Ideas from way back then still helping us out now.
Yeah.
But the author also adds a note of caution, right, about interpretation.
Absolutely. Look, psychological discussions are always tricky because they're filtered through our own individual perspective, aren't they?
Yeah, sure.
So the author admits, their interpretation might stretch Schiller's original words a bit here and there. It's inherent in the process.
Right. And speaking of perspective, the author actually categorizes Schiller psychologically. This is where it gets quite interesting.
Yeah, they do. The author classifies Schiller as belonging to the introverted type.
Okay, introverted. Meaning?
Meaning someone who primarily directs their psychic energy inwards, towards their own thoughts, feelings, ideas. It's contrasted with Goethe, who the author sees as leaning more extroverted energy flowing outwards, to the world, to people.
Though there's a caveat about Goethe's intuition, I remember.
Yes, precisely. Goethe's overriding intuition complicates a simple extroverted label, but the basic contrast is useful here.
So, seeing Schiller as introverted, what are the implications for understanding his work, according to the author?
Well, the suggestion is that this introverted viewpoint might have shaped how he framed his ideas. It could create certain, let's say, limitations or biases.
Like wearing particular glasses changes how you see things.
Sort of, yeah. If you're naturally focused inward, your formulations might reflect that. So we need to evaluate his ideas with that potential bias in mind. It calls for a critical perspective.
Makes sense. We all have our filters. Now, the author also makes sure we understand that introvert isn't just one thing, right? There are nuances.
Yes, very important point. The author distinguishes the general classes introverted, extroverted from more specific function types.
Function types like thinking, feeling.
Thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition, these are like different tools in our mental toolkit. And crucially, an introvert isn't automatically a thinking type. They could be primarily a feeling type, guided by internal values and emotions.
And same for extroverts.
Same for extroverts. Their outward focus doesn't dictate which function leads the way. Could be thinking, could be sensation. It's more complex than just introvert to extrovert.
Got it. Okay, so with that framework laid out, the author moves into one of Schiller's big arguments about how our different abilities get separated.
Exactly. Schiller's core idea here is that culture itself inflicted this wound upon modern humanity.
A wound? Wow. How?
By differentiating the individual, by encouraging specialization. He saw this as creating a deep split within us. Our different parts, our functions weren't working together anymore.
The author compares it to Amphrodite's wound, right? The one that never heals.
Precisely. It represents this ongoing consequence of functional differentiation, where one function becomes overdeveloped, hypertrophied.
And the others just wither away.
Yeah.
Atrophy.
Yes. Schiller actually wondered why modern individuals seemed in some ways less whole than people in ancient times, even though society had progressed so much.
And he blamed this specialization.
That was his argument. He pointed to art and learning, where you had the intuitive types and the speculative analytical types becoming almost separate species. And he saw how society started valuing very specific functions, memory, intellect, technical skill, often overlooking the whole person. Other aptitudes just got neglected.
It's like you become just your job title or your most obvious skill.
That's exactly Schiller's worry. Society might value one person for their brain, another for their hands, but lose sight of the integrated individual.
Now, Schiller had a particular view of the ancient Greeks in this context, didn't he? He sort of idealized them.
He did, yes. Like many classicists of his time, he looked at their amazing art and philosophy and saw this ideal of individual wholeness. He thought the Greeks were less specialized, allowing for more rounded development.
But the author pushes back on that a bit.
Quite strongly, actually. The author argues that the specialization wasn't just arbitrary, it was perhaps a necessary driver of progress.
Ah.
And while some ancient Greeks achieved remarkable individual culture, it was often built, let's be honest, on the suppression of many others. Think of the helots in Sparta or slaves in Athens.
So that idealized individual culture wasn't exactly widespread.
Not in the way we think of collective culture today. The author credits Christianity, interestingly, with fostering a kind of collective culture by shifting focus onto the individual's inner psychological life.
Okay. But then the author draws a parallel, doesn't he, between ancient external structures and modern internal ones.
Yes, this is a fascinating point. Just as antiquity had its external hierarchies, with many suppressed for the few, the author suggests that the intense focus on one superior function within the individual, maybe reason, maybe faith, depending on the era, created a kind of internal slave culture,
An internal slave culture, wow.
where the other, less valued functions are repressed or underdeveloped. It mirrors the external structure.
That's a really striking way to put it. Internal inequalities mirroring societal ones. And the author thinks Schiller's concerns are still relevant.
Absolutely. That core worry that individual development hasn't kept pace with collective progress, maybe even regressed, feels very current. The author even nods to thinkers like Stirner and Nietzsche, suggesting their radical critiques were perhaps necessary reactions to this imbalance.
Right. Okay, so let's shift gears slightly. Schiller also talked about the conflict of instincts and beauty. How does beauty fit in?
Schiller saw the clash of our inner powers, our instincts, as the great instrument of culture, but crucially, only an instrument, a stage, not the end goal.
So conflict drives progress, but it's not the destination.
Exactly. And he knew culture could mean different things, collective progress versus individual development.
Yeah.
He saw cultural ideals swinging, between extroverted object-focused phases and introverted subject-focused ones.
And that nostalgia for the ancient world we mentioned fits the introverted side, the focus on individual culture.
Precisely. For those German classicists, antiquity was a symbol of that idealized individual development. Schiller himself noted that one-sidedness, while maybe useful to society in a narrow sense, ultimately leads to error.
But this one-sidedness can be dangerous in modern times, can't it? Especially with large organizations.
Yes, the author highlights how big modern systems can unintentionally crush individuality by only valuing that one differentiated function needed for the job.
So people become just a cog in the machine.
Reduced to a mere function, yeah. Debased, even. Other parts of them just don't get exercised or valued.
And Schiller himself apparently felt this tension very personally.
Oh, definitely. You see it in his letters, especially to Goethe. This constant struggle between his imagination, his intuition, and his more abstract philosophical thinking. The poet versus the thinker inside him.
That sounds exhausting.
It likely was. The author explains that when a function isn't fully developed or integrated, it tends to operate more unconsciously. It can get mixed up, contaminated by other functions.
Leading to?
Feeling carried away, coerced by impulses or feelings that seem to come out of the blue. The author thinks Schiller's famous cry, "Why is it that we are still barbarians?" wasn't just about society lacking reason.
No. What was it about then?
It stemmed, the author argues, from his own subjective psychology. His own feeling of being one-sided, lacking inner moderation, being pulled by these competing forces within him. Not just a lack of logic, but a lack of inner harmony.
And the French Revolution happening at the time must have really driven that home for him.
Absolutely. A perfect, terrible example of rational ideals collapsing under the weight of, unreasoning forces. It showed the limits of intellect when confronted with raw human nature.
So, if reason alone isn't enough, what did Schiller see as the path towards harmony, towards integrating these parts?
Well, Schiller first proposed that truth itself had to become a power. It needed force behind it to overcome reason's failures.
Okay.
But the author kind of critiques this, pointing to the Enlightenment's tendency to overvalue intellect. They even bring up that character in Goethe's Faust, the Praktifantasmist.
Ah, the ultimate rationalist killjoy.
Exactly. As an example of that intellectual arrogance detached from deeper realities. Schiller's own internal battle, poet versus philosopher, surely fed into this.
His admiration for Goethe, who seemed more whole.
Right. It likely stemmed from his own feeling of division. Now, the author introduces a key psychological idea here. The unconscious often compensates for conscious one-sidedness.
How so?
If your conscious mind is highly abstract, very intellectual, your unconscious might develop this intense craving for the concrete, for the object, for sensory experience. It tries to balance things out.
Like a pendulum swinging back. That makes intuitive sense.
It does. And Schiller saw the senses, interestingly, as the introvert's path towards the divine in a way. But he also saw schism there between spiritual thinking and this sort of raw, sensuous affectivity.
That should differ for the extrovert.
Yeah, the extrovert typically has a more developed relationship with the object, with the external world. Their ideas, though, might be more sensory, more concrete, less abstract than the introverts.
Okay, so this leads to the idea of sensuous feeling. What exactly is that?
The author describes it as a kind of collective, almost primal feeling tied to the senses. It can lead to what Jung called participation mystique, that feeling of merging with or being lost in the object of your senses.
Which could feel threatening for an introvert.
Potentially, yes. That feeling of losing boundaries might push an introvert to retreat further into abstraction, into their thoughts, to sort of escape that dependency.
So how did Schiller suggest bridging this? Escaping being just swept away by the world.
His formula was essentially impart form to matter. Take your inner ideas, your inner world, and actively shape the external world with them. Externalize the internal.
But the author questions that a bit ethically.
Yes. What about the rights of the object itself? Is the external world just raw material for our inner ideas? It raises questions about the introvert imposing their godlike world of ideas onto reality.
And the extrovert's approach would be the opposite.
Kind of the inverse, yeah. The author suggests the extrovert's formula might be internalize all without and shape everything within. Like Goethe, absorbing experience and transforming it internally into art or philosophy.
Right.
But the author stresses Schiller's approach assumes a very high level of psychological development where both intellect and affectivity are already quite refined.
Which isn't always the case, obviously. Finding that balance seems to be the real challenge.
That's the crux of it. We need connection, but there's danger in letting the archaic, inferior parts of ourselves run rampant and do violence to the object or to others. Think of Nietzsche, the author mentions him here.
So Schiller's formula, while insightful, may be a bit idealistic for its time.
The author sees it as having a somewhat naive, idealistic character, typical of the era before, psychological criticism really dug into the darker side of human nature, the unconscious.
And the unconscious can react against conscious ideals.
Yes. The author brings up enantiodromia, the tendency for things to swing to their opposite. If the conscious ideal is too lofty or one-sided, the unconscious might develop this archaic, sensual, even brutal counterposition, a kind of inner god rising up in opposition.
And Schiller identified the instinct tying spirit to the senses as sensation.
He did. The author reads this through the lens of type, suggesting it reflects a reactive, affect-focused introvert's perspective, where sensation feels like something happening to you, rather than active desire.
The author also clarifies Schiller's use of feeling and sensation, right? He sometimes blurred them.
Yeah, Schiller often seemed to conflate the two. The author points out that differentiated feeling, in the psychological sense, is about values, about judgment. It's not just raw sensation. It can grasp universal values.
Okay.
But for the introverted thinking type, this raw feeling sensation can feel foreign, almost alien to the ego. Whereas for an extrovert, that connection to the object via sensation might feel like their true nature.
Schiller also had a specific view of the person, the self. More introverted.
Definitely. He saw the person as residing in the absolute unity of the constant ego. That stable inner core is paramount. An extrovert might define the person more through their web of relationships, their connection to the world.
Two different anchors for identity.
Exactly. And Schiller clearly valued formative thought, that structuring intellectual capacity much higher than feeling sensation, which leads the author to ask,
What?
well, does the value of personality lie only in permanence? Or do change, development, adaptation hold equal, maybe even higher value?
That's a deep question. What about thinking itself? Does it grasp everything?
The author argues no. Thinking, while aiming for universality, only captures part of the world. We need all the functions, feeling, sensation, intuition too, for full adaptation.
So identifying only with thinking makes you incomplete.
In a way, yes. You become estranged from yourself, a sort of collective being defined by just one function, while other vital parts of your psyche languish.
But Schiller knew there was a danger of imbalance, didn't he?
He did. He saw that if thinking is privileged, feeling sensation might try to take its place in unhealthy ways, leading to inner chaos, a non-entity.
How does that play out, according to the author?
For the introverted thinking type, trying to impose positive thought onto underdeveloped feeling sensation can backfire, leading to this sort of inferior, inauthentic extroversion. The ego dissolves into archaic collective ties.
And the alternative isn't great either.
No, amputating feeling sensations entirely leads to sterility, being cut off from life.
And extroverts have their own version of this pitfall.
Yes, they might lapse into what the author calls sensation thinking, a kind of primitive, concrete, collective thinking as their inferior function takes over. It mirrors the introvert's potential problems. Schiller sensed this huge gap, this opposition between sensation and thought, matter and form.
So given this gap, what was Schiller's proposed solution for bringing them together?
He argued for a depotentiation, a lessening of the power of both sides, both the material, sensuous instinct and the formal thinking instinct, through an act of freedom, of moral intensity. The idea isn't for one to win, but for a reciprocity, a symbiosis, where neither loses except to the other's advantage. Each establishes and restricts the other.
So strengthening the opposition, not weakening it.
Paradoxically, yes, preserving and strengthening the opposition, but in a balanced way. It challenges the dominance of any single socially valued function and allows the inferior functions some release, some value.
It sounds like abolishing the idea that one perspective holds all the truth.
Exactly. It's like abolishing the power principle of a single, universally valid standpoint based on just one function. Schiller saw this reciprocal action as a task of reason, an infinite goal for perfecting our being.
But the author disagrees about reason being the main tool here.
Right. The author thinks this union happens irrationally. It's not reasoned out. It arises from life, from experience, as a compromise, or, crucially, as a new third thing, a symbol that emerges between the opposites.
Ah, the symbol again. And this connects to Schiller's living form and the play instinct.
Yes. Schiller saw living form as the object of a mediating function, which he called the play instinct. This living form unites the opposites and has aesthetic qualities, beauty. It's essentially a symbol.
Okay. And the author connects this play instinct to their own idea of creative fantasy.
Precisely. The author sees Schiller's play instinct as akin to their concept of creative fantasy, the function that creates symbols. But you also need a function to understand symbols, symbolic thinking or intuition, and symbol creation isn't rational.
It's more intuitive, imaginative.
Exactly. The author agrees with Schiller's intuition about needing a third mediating element, but notes it can be hard to see in a purely differentiated type. In the introvert, it often appears linked to that feeling sensation complex we discussed.
Because fantasy merges opposites.
Yes, fantasy activity is where opposites can meet. It's creative and receptive, active and passive, and it's often connected to the repressed inferior functions, which is why introvert sensation might have that tinge of unconscious fantasy.
Which brings us to Schiller's famous line about playing and being fully human.
Man plays only when he is in the full sense of the word a man, and he is only wholly man when he is playing. Schiller links this play instinct directly to beauty and wholeness.
But he also saw dangers in just focusing on play or beauty.
He did. He worried that crude taste could just seize on the novel, the startling, the gaudy, and miss true simplicity and beauty. He seemed to realize that a purely playful, aesthetic attitude might not be substantial enough.
Why not?
Because the conflict between the functions is so fundamental, so serious. You need the third factor that has equal weight, equal seriousness. Play alone might just lead to unlimited determinability, a kind of aimless potential, not necessarily beauty or a resolution to our inner barbarism.
So what did he think was needed then, beyond just play?
He stressed the need to establish our innermost being, our core self, as something that partakes in both sensation and thinking, but is also differentiated from them, something capable of experiencing them, using them, but not identical to them.
The mind itself is neither matter nor form.
Exactly. The author interprets this as the key insight. The possibility of separating out an individual nucleus, the self, which can be subject or object to the opposing functions, but remains distinct.
And if you fail to do that,
you get identified with the opposites, torn apart by the inner conflict, disunited.
The author brings in another philosophical idea here, synesius.
Yes, the spiritus fantasticus. Sinisi saw it as this medium between the eternal and the temporal, uniting opposites, partaking in instinct. It sounds very much like Schiller's play instinct, or the author's creative fantasy, just framed
A
metaphysically.
connecting spirit.
Connecting extremes, yes. Synesius even linked it to animal intelligence. The core idea remains. If individuality fails to differentiate, it gets pulled apart. Schiller seemed to sense this, moving beyond just play towards something more powerful needed to detach the self from these pulls.
Because logic alone won't stop the fight between these inner forces.
Right. They remain active. And willpower alone isn't enough if it's just driven by one side. You need a content for the will, something grounded in that intermediate symbolic state.
And the symbol works because it's both real and unreal.
Exactly. Psychically real, effective. Physically unreal, not concrete. It embraces both realities, the inner and the outer, thought and sensation. Consciousness tends to separate, value one, suppress the other.
While the unconscious is more unified, but less accessible.
Less reflective, yeah. Instinct just happens, usually self-regulating unless faced with novel situations. Conscious decisions often can't resolve deep instinctual conflicts. You need to tap into that unconscious level where functions are merged.
But unconscious stuff has low energy, needs a boost.
Often, yes. Bringing symbols, lucky ideas, hunches into consciousness requires energy. The author argues this energy comes from differentiating the self from the opposites, withdrawing libido from both inner and outer fixations, an introversion process.
So Schiller's living form is a good term for the symbol that emerges.
The author thinks so. It contains images of psychological growth. They then introduce their own term for this mediating process, the transcendent function.
The transcendent function, connecting conscious and unconscious.
Yes, a combined function dealing with real and imaginary, conscious and unconscious elements. Creative fantasy, this irrational instinctive function, is key because it can supply the will with a uniting content. Schiller grasped this intuitively, but maybe didn't fully harness it for motivating the will.
Schiller also mentioned a step backward into unlimited determinability. How does the author unpack that?
They interpret that step backward as exactly this process. Differentiation from the warring instincts, withdrawal of energy, introversion into the unconscious.
And unlimited determinability is like the unconscious state itself.
Yes, an empty, receptive state of consciousness, open to all determinants, the potential. Schiller then imagined uniting this emptiness with the greatest possible fullness of content, the unconscious creating something positive.
A symbolic determinant, a mediatory condition.
Exactly. He called the state where sense and reason are active but negate each other the aesthetic condition. The author sees this as describing the space where the unconscious can emerge, though they point out a contradiction.
Which is?
How can sense and reason be simultaneously active if they're also mutually canceling each other out? But the core idea holds. The author equates Schiller's mediating aesthetic function with their own concept of symbol-forming activity creative fantasy. Schiller's definition of the aesthetic character relating to all faculties, specific to none, fits the symbol better, the author argues.
And Schiller felt this state grants freedom.
Yes, man has the freedom to become what he ought to be. But the author critiques the aesthetic label again here. They feel the primordial image Schiller sensed was maybe deeper, more akin to Eastern ideas.
Like Brahmanatman or the Tao?
Concepts like tat twamasi, that art thou, where self and object fuse. The author admits the analogy isn't perfect, but points to similar ideas emerging autophonously in the West later, suggesting a common root in the collective unconscious.
So Schiller's idea needs freeing from just aesthetics.
The author thinks so. Aestheticism can hinder deeper work by focusing on pleasure, avoiding the negative, lacking moral force. Resolving deep inner conflict might need something more like the effort found in Eastern paths.
It seems Schiller himself shifted from play instinct to aesthetic mood, which gained almost mystical weight.
Maybe because these deep ideas are just hard to put into words clearly. And think about play and seriousness. They seem opposite. But serious play exists, fantasy arising from inner necessity.
Creative work often looks like play from the outside.
It's true. Schiller wanted to bring this creative help to everyone, not just the genius. He demanded detachment from opposites, emptying consciousness.
It's an undifferentiated state.
Almost like an abaissement du niveau mental, a lowering of the conscious threshold. Schiller doesn't give techniques, but the example of contemplating the Juno Ludovisi statue suggests aesthetic devotion, surrender, empathy.
Devotion. That seems key.
The author thinks devotion was constantly on Schiller's mind, linking to the religious problem. Maybe this is how his ideas could reach the common person through collective religious devotion.
How does that connect to symbols?
Humanity found its gods, the author argues, by accepting the reality of the symbol. It's a regression of libido towards the primordial, giving rise to symbols that then guide progressive movement. Think of Goethe's divine images from the mother symbols of inner union.
Living symbols guiding life.
Yes, like living religious symbols, not dead dogma. The author laments the modern dismissal of psychology, the need to see things as they are internally, beyond just morals or hygiene. Symbol formation through devotion is a collective religious phenomenon, supporting the idea of wider application.
And the author connects this back to therapy.
Briefly, yes. The symbol, as exponent of the unconscious, is crucial in treating neurosis, mediating unconscious via the transcendent function. They acknowledge more work is needed on this, mentioning literary examples where unconscious material gets aesthetic elaboration.
So we've got quite a way beyond Schiller's starting point.
Definitely. Prompted by him, but aesthetic mood becomes too limiting. Schiller almost collapsed it into beauty, blurring cause and effect, making the indeterminate state sound determined.
And the definition of aesthetic character had flaws.
The author thinks so. Beautiful can't cover all human faculties or the dark side of human nature. This flaw makes it unclear how the mediatory state is achieved. Schiller often falls back on enjoyment of pure beauty.
Which seems insufficient for such a deep problem.
Right. The author concludes it's unfair to expect one person to solve this. It's the work of time, of cultures.
But Schiller's greatness remains.
Absolutely. In his psychological observation, his intuition, grasping the symbol as uniting opposites, bridging psychic reality and physical non-reality, that's huge.
Again, that final point about appearance, Schiller's defense of it.
Yes, his apologia for appearance, the human right to sovereignty in creating appearance, distinguishing mine from thine, separating form from being, granting form independence. He believed this actually secures truth by liberating reality from mere appearance.
The striving for meaningful appearance requires more effort than just sticking to reality.
He argued it demands greater abstraction, freedom of heart, vigor of will, a really powerful concluding thought from Schiller.
Wow. Okay, that was definitely a deep dive. So just to wrap up the key things, we looked at Schiller's ideas on functions getting separated, almost like internal reflections of society.
Right, how one part gets overvalued, others neglected, leading to that inner tension.
And how just using reason isn't enough to fix it. We need something else. The symbol.
The symbol as that crucial bridge, emerging from the unconscious, potentially through creative fantasy or that aesthetic mood to create wholeness. Those are definitely some aha moments.
Yeah, seeing how societal values can create those internal imbalances and the power of the symbol for integration really makes you think.
It's complex stuff, for sure, but hopefully this gives you a good handle on these pretty profound psychological concepts.
We really hope so. Maybe think about how this plays out for you. Do you see those different parts or instincts at work inside you or out in the world? Does this whole idea of the symbol helping navigate challenges, does that resonate at all?
Yeah, maybe chew on that. And here's a final thought. In this crazy, complex world we're in, could really understanding our psychological types and embracing symbolic thinking, could that actually help us find more harmony, both individually and maybe collectively?
Something to ponder. As always, this is just the start of your own exploration.